Rose used to believe her heart belonged only to power and the boardroom, until fate dropped her onto a deserted island with Marcus. The line replayed in her mind like a whisper from some future narrator, though in that moment she was strapped into leather, 30,000 feet above the Florida coast, trying not to panic as the jet shuddered violently. The left engine had coughed, a deep metallic protest, and Marcus Carter's hands tightened on the controls. He was calm, his dark eyes locked on the failing gauges, but Rose saw the way his jaw clenched. For the first time in years, she felt the sharp edge of helplessness. The world outside was all blue and blinding sun, but inside the cabin alarms screamed. Rose Whitman, 40-year-old CEO who had faced hostile takeovers and crushed rivals with a smile, realized none of her victories mattered here. The money, the headlines, the endless meetings in Manhattan's glass towers, none of it could silence the shriek of an engine dying mid-air. Marcus leaned back just enough to be heard over the roar. "Brace yourself." His voice was even, steady, the kind of tone that belonged to a man who had wrestled with danger before. Rose caught her reflection in the dark cockpit glass, eyes wide, lips parted. She wasn't the Iron Queen anymore. She was just a woman strapped into a fragile tube of steel, staring at a man who somehow seemed carved from bedrock. She whispered without thinking, "Now I'm in your hands." Marcus didn't flinch. "I'll get us down," he said, pulling against the trembling yoke. Then his words struck like an arrow. "But promise me something. Stop giving your life to people who never once saved you." The jet dipped. Rose gripped the armrest so hard her nails tore the leather. Outside, turquoise water spread wide as a sheet of glass, interrupted only by a pale smudge of sand. Marcus spotted it too. He fought the controls, shoulder muscles screaming. The wheels struck the shallows, bounced, then the whole craft slammed sideways, grinding across surf and sand in a storm of salt and noise. When silence came, it was jagged and unreal. Marcus tasted blood, head ringing. He forced his seatbelt open and staggered toward the cabin. Rose lay slumped, hair undone, blood streaking her temple. He knelt, fingers to her pulse. Relief surged, still beating. "Come on, Rose," he muttered, shaking her gently. She groaned, eyelids fluttering. Minutes later they stumbled out into harsh sunlight. The wreck sprawled like a broken bird behind them. Waves hissed against the shore of a narrow quay, palms leaning crooked, as if mocking their arrival. Rose's heels sank uselessly into the sand. Marcus bent, tugged them off, set them aside. "Barefoot works better here." She stared at him, startled by his bluntness. No one in her empire spoke to her like that. The first hours blurred Marcus scavenging supplies, Rose hovering, lost between habit and reality. She clung to her laptop until he lifted it gently from her hands. "This won't keep you alive." For a moment, she nearly snapped back, ready with the same sharp tongue that had silenced boardrooms. But the words never left. She was shaking too badly. By sunset, Marcus had built a crude shelter from bent panels and palm fronds. His shoulder throbbed with every motion, yet his movements were practiced, calm. Rose watched, disoriented. She had always dismissed quiet men in service roles as background, never really seen them. Now, one of them was the only reason she was breathing, and he wasn't clamoring for her approval. He was simply doing what needed to be done. When sparks finally caught and a flame curled upward, Rose laughed short, shaky but genuine. "I've signed billion-dollar deals," she said, hugging her arms against the ocean wind. "But tonight fire feels like the biggest victory." Marcus gave a half smile. "My grandma used to say fire's a promise. You keep it alive, it'll keep you alive." The stars pricked sharp overhead. Rose lay close to the makeshift fire, every muscle aching, her mind trying to stitch sense back together. Yet the only thing she kept replaying was the steadiness in Marcus's voice, the way he looked at her without judgment, only focus. She was used to being measured by quarterly earnings and media profiles. Here, she was just a woman bleeding salt water into the sand. And, to her shock, she felt safer for it. Her breath shuddered. She turned slightly, watching him sit a few feet away, profile lit by the glow. He was hurting. She could see it in the way his good hand rubbed his bad shoulder, but he didn't complain. He kept watch instead, gaze steady on the horizon. Rose closed her eyes, murmuring words she barely knew she meant. "I really am in your hands now." Marcus heard her through the crackle of the fire. He didn't answer aloud, but for the first time since the engine had died, his lips curved into the faintest smile, as if he too had heard a prophecy in that whispered confession. Morning broke with a sky too bright, too clean, as if the world had no memory of the chaos that had unfolded the night before. Rose stirred on the sand, stiff from a night of shallow sleep, her hair damp with sea mist, her designer blouse torn at the sleeve. The first thing she noticed was Marcus already on his feet, scanning the horizon, his stance wide and steady like a man rooted to the earth. He was cradling his injured shoulder with his good arm, but his focus was sharp. The crash site loomed behind them, the broken jet half submerged in the shallows, its once gleaming frame bent like a toy abandoned by a careless child. Smoke no longer rose, only the bitter scent of fuel lingered in the air. Rose pushed herself up, her body protesting every motion. Her heels were gone, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. A part of her wanted to demand answers, to insist someone would come for them any minute, but the truth shimmered in the endless blue horizon. No ships, no planes, no help, just the whisper of waves and the low hum of Marcus's breath as he turned to her. "We need shelter," he said simply. No panic in his voice, no drama, just certainty. She almost snapped back that she had a board meeting in Miami that afternoon, but even in her foggy state she knew how absurd that sounded. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and nodded. Marcus limped back toward the wreck, pulling at twisted panels of metal, his movements efficient despite his pain. Rose trailed behind him, her pulse still hammering from the crash, her mind clinging to fragments of her old life. She wanted her phone, her assistant, her driver waiting at the curb. She wanted the armor of her world back, the world where she controlled outcomes with a signature or a single word. But here, nothing obeyed her. Marcus emerged with a half-crushed medical kit, a plastic jug of water, and a flare gun stripped of its cartridges. He set them down on the sand between them like offerings. "It's not much, but it'll keep us alive a little longer," he said. She crouched beside him, reaching out to touch the battered laptop he'd carried to shore for her, its sleek silver frame dented and useless. For a moment, she clung to it like it was her lifeline. Marcus shook his head and took it gently from her. "Out here, that's dead weight." His tone wasn't harsh, but it cut through her defenses sharper than any insult. She wanted to argue, to remind him who she was, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she let him set the machine aside, watching it lie abandoned on the sand. By afternoon, the sun grew brutal. Marcus worked steadily, dragging branches and fronds from the edge of the tree line to piece together a crude shelter. His shirt clung with sweat, his shoulder clearly worsening with each pull, yet he did not stop. Rose tried to help, fumbling with the unfamiliar tasks, her manicured nails snapping against rough bark. She hated feeling useless. When she grimaced, Marcus paused just long enough to offer instruction. "Lean the fronds this way, angle them so rain runs off." She followed clumsily, but for the first time she wasn't giving orders, she was following. By the time dusk approached, they had a lean-to just high enough to crouch under, its roof slanted against the sea breeze. It was far from the polished interiors Rose was used to, but when Marcus lit a small flame beneath it with driftwood and flint, she felt something like awe. They sat close to the fire, shadows flickering across their faces. Rose's stomach grumbled, the hunger sharp after a day without food. Marcus noticed. "Tomorrow I'll try fishing. Tonight we ration what we have." He handed her half a granola bar salvaged from the wreck. She chewed slowly, the taste of oats and sugar grounding her in the moment. He leaned back against the makeshift wall, his profile strong, eyes reflecting the firelight. Rose found herself studying him more than the flames, her thoughts drifting into dangerous territory. He was just a pilot, hired help, someone who was supposed to be invisible. Yet she had never seen anyone so steady. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't empty. Rose spoke first, her voice softer than she expected. "Do you think anyone knows where we are?" Marcus shook his head. "The distress signal might have gone out, might not have. Either way, we plan as if no one's coming soon." She hated the answer, but the honesty anchored her. She pulled her knees close, resting her chin, trying to imagine headlines. CEO, missing after crash. In New York, her board would already be scrambling, her investors calculating, vultures circling. And here she sat barefoot in the sand, dependent on a man she had barely spoken to before the world tipped. Night returned, stars sharp and bright, the fire popping as waves whispered just beyond their shelter. Rose's body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. She glanced at Marcus, who was shifting uncomfortably, his injured shoulder stiff. Without thinking, she reached for the first aid kit, unwrapped a bandage. "Let me," she said. He looked at her, skeptical, then relented. She wrapped his shoulder with slow care, her fingers brushing his skin, feeling the heat of him. It startled her, the intimacy of the gesture, the way her heart picked up rhythm. She tied the knot and sat back quickly, embarrassed by the rush of emotion. He gave a small nod. "Good work," he said. Simple words, but they warmed her more than the fire. As the night deepened, Rose shifted closer to the flames, her eyes heavy. She thought of her penthouse windows overlooking Central Park, of the polished glass conference tables, of the endless faces nodding at her commands. None of it seemed real anymore. What felt real was the salt on her skin, the ache in her muscles, and Marcus's steady presence only a breath away. She whispered into the darkness, not sure if he was awake. "I was wrong. Power never kept me safe, not once." Marcus stirred, his voice low. "That's because power's just a suit you wear. It comes off quick when the storm hits." His words hung in the air, truer than anything she had ever read in business school. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the waves. For the first time since the engines had failed, Rose wasn't only terrified. Something new had cracked through her fear, something she didn't yet understand, but could feel pulsing in her chest like a secret drum. And as the firelight flickered across Marcus's steady profile, she knew her life had already changed in ways no headline could ever capture. The night pressed in heavy, darker than anything Rose had known in her city life. New York at midnight was never truly dark, always the hum of traffic, neon flashing off glass, the distant echo of sirens. Here the only sounds were the restless ocean and the crackle of their fragile fire. She lay on her side inside the lean-to, the sand rough beneath her cheek, the faint scent of salt and smoke clinging to her skin. Every muscle in her body throbbed, and her head pounded from the cut near her temple, but sleep refused to come. Her eyes kept drifting to Marcus, silhouetted against the flames, his shoulders squared, though one arm hung stiff at his side. He had insisted on keeping watch, and there was something both stubborn and comforting in that image, the man who had carried her through chaos, now silently guarding against a world that offered them no mercy. Rose shifted, hugging her arms around her body. She had always despised vulnerability, had spent years building armor with power suits and icy stairs. Yet lying barefoot in the sand, stripped of everything familiar, she felt exposed in a way that terrified and, strangely, freed her. Her thoughts swirled with fragments of the day, the roar of the engines, his command to brace, his promise that he would get them down. And most of all, his words still echoed, "Stop giving your life to people who never once saved you." She had spent 2 decades handing herself over to board members who demanded numbers, to shareholders who devoured her victories and never cared about her bruises. And now a man she had barely known until yesterday had saved her life with skill and calm she could neither buy nor command. Marcus adjusted the fire, coaxing the embers into a steadier glow. His movements were economical, quiet, but Rose could sense the ache in his body. She pushed herself up, ignoring the protest in her limbs, and reached for the first aid kit again. He looked at her with mild surprise. "You should rest," he said. "You're the one bleeding." She gave a small laugh, shaky. "So are you." She leaned closer, checking the bandage she had tied earlier. In the firelight, his skin gleamed with sweat, and she caught the faint scar that traced his collarbone. She wondered what stories lay beneath that scar, what losses he had carried alone. He did not pull away as she tightened the wrap, their closeness stirring something dangerous inside her. When she finished, she settled beside him, closer to the fire. Silence stretched, but this time it was not awkward. The flames popped, sending sparks skyward like fleeting stars. Rose found herself speaking words she hadn't planned. "I've spent years chasing numbers, headlines, reputation, and yet, right now, all I can think about is whether this fire stays alive." Marcus gave a low hum, neither agreement nor dismissal, just acknowledgement. "That's because the fire's honest. It tells you the truth. Keep it fed, it burns. Neglect it, it dies. Power works the same way, except people pretend it doesn't." She studied him, caught by the weight of his simplicity. In a single sentence, he had said more than most executives did in entire speeches. The night grew colder, Rose shivered despite the flames. Without hesitation, Marcus shrugged out of his torn jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was rough, smelled faintly of smoke and seawater, but the gesture landed deep in her chest. She murmured thanks, her voice unsteady. She couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for her with no agenda, no angle. She wondered if she had ever let anyone close enough to try. Time stretched, the stars wheeling overhead. Rose's eyelids grew heavy, but her mind fought against surrender. She kept watching Marcus, the firelight carving lines across his face. He looked like a man carved by storms, steady in ways she had never learned, and with each passing minute, the pull inside her deepened. It wasn't gratitude anymore, it was something warmer, something she didn't dare name. She finally drifted to sleep with that thought trembling in her chest. At dawn, the world shifted again. Rose woke to the sound of gulls and the crash of waves. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, but Marcus was already moving along the beach, his figure steady against the horizon. She sat up, brushing sand from her hair, and realized her first thought was not of Wall Street or her empire, but of him. He returned, carrying a piece of wreckage shaped like a pan. "We'll use this to boil water," he said, practical as ever. She smiled faintly. "Good morning to you, too." The remark surprised even her. Sarcasm had always been her armor, but now it came softened with something else. They spent the day gathering, improvising. Marcus showed her how to collect rainwater in leaves, how to weave fronds for shade. Rose fumbled often, cursing under her breath, but he was patient. Each correction was gentle, steady, as if he had all the time in the world. By afternoon, they had a small stockpile of water and a sturdier shelter. Rose felt the ache in her muscles, but also a strange pride. For once her hands had built something that wasn't numbers on a screen. As the sun dipped, they sat by the fire again. Rose studied Marcus quietly. "You don't say much," she said. He looked at her, eyes steady. Talking never saved anyone. Doing does. She considered that, then asked softly, "And who saves you?" The question hung in the salt air, heavier than she intended. He looked away, jaw tight. "No one," he said finally. The honesty struck her, sharp and unguarded. She wanted to ask more, to pry open the story behind his scars, but something told her not to push. Some truths needed patience. That night, as they lay near the fire, Rose whispered into the dark, "I thought I knew what strength was. I was wrong." She didn't think he would answer, but his voice came low, almost tender. "Strength isn't about never falling. It's about who helps you stand again." She closed her eyes, the words wrapping around her like the jacket he had given. Her chest tightened with a new awareness, one she could no longer ignore. With every passing hour, every quiet exchange, she was falling. Not into fear, not into despair, but into something far more dangerous for a woman who had built her life on walls. The beginning of love. If you've ever been touched by Rose's fight for survival and the unexpected bond growing between her and Marcus, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a number 1 inch the comments if you believe that love and trust can be found in the most unlikely places, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of their journey. The second morning rose humid and golden, sunlight spilling across the narrow stretch of sand where they had survived the crash. Rose stirred awake to the sound of Marcus working again, dragging pieces of wreckage closer to the shelter. His movements were slower now, shoulders stiff from the injury, but still steady. She pushed herself up, every muscle protesting, and called out, "You should be resting." He didn't glance back. "If I rest, we starve. Shelter and water don't build themselves." She frowned, brushing sand from her hair. In her old world, she was the one who gave orders and men jumped to obey. Here, she was the one being managed by calm insistence. It was both infuriating and disarming. She rose barefoot, the sand warm against her skin, and walked to help. "Fine," she said. "Show me what to do." He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face, but he handed her a bundle of fronds. "Lean them against that panel, angle them down. Rain runs off instead of soaking us." She obeyed, awkward at first, fingers clumsy. He adjusted her work with quiet patience. "Not bad," he murmured. She bristled. "Not bad? I built companies, Marcus. I can figure out a leaf." He gave the faintest smile. "Out here, leaves matter more than companies." By midday, sweat slicked her skin, her designer blouse stained and torn, but the shelter stood taller, sturdier. They paused in the shade, sharing the last of the granola Marcus had salvaged. Rose bit into it, chewing slowly. "You always this calm?" she asked. He shrugged. "Calm keeps people alive. Panic gets them killed." She studied him, irritated by his certainty but unable to deny its comfort. "You sound like you've done this before," she pressed. He looked out to the horizon, eyes shadowed. "I've done it. Lost people too." The blunt words silenced her. She realized there were whole worlds inside him she hadn't seen, scars invisible under the quiet. In the afternoon, Marcus attempted fishing, with a strip of metal bent into a hook and a strand of wiring. Rose sat nearby, watching, trying not to think about the board members back in New York likely circling her empty chair. She hated the helplessness gnawing at her. After a while she rose and waded into the shallow water, determined to do something. She tried to mimic Marcus's movements, only to slip and nearly fall. He caught her elbow with his good hand, steadying her. "Slow down," he said. "The ocean doesn't care about your schedule." She bristled again, but the warmth of his hand lingered long after he let go. Later, when he managed to catch 2 small fish, they built a fire and cooked them on flat stones. The taste was smoky, salty, far from the chef-prepared meals Rose was used to, but it filled her in a way no restaurant ever had. She ate quietly, watching Marcus chew thoughtfully, his profile lit by the orange glow. She surprised herself by speaking. "In New York, I don't even remember the last meal I actually tasted. Everything's meetings, phone calls, half-eaten salads." He glanced at her. "And here?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Here it feels like life." The word hung between them, heavier than she meant. As darkness fell, they worked to keep the fire strong. Rose tried arranging the wood, but it collapsed into ash. She cursed under her breath. Marcus reached over, his larger hand guiding hers. "Like this. Balance matters. Too much weight and the flame dies." Their hands brushed, sparks of another kind flaring in her chest. She pulled back too quickly, embarrassed. He returned to his quiet watch, pretending not to notice, but she felt the heat long after. That night, lying close to the fire, Rose stared up at the sky. "You really believe no one's coming?" she asked. His voice came calm but firm. "We can hope, but we live like no one will." She swallowed. Hope had been her currency for years. Hope sold to investors. Hope manufactured in press releases. But here, hope was fragile, dangerous. She turned toward him, her voice small. "So what if no one does?" He looked at her, firelight catching the lines of his face. "Then we keep each other alive." The words struck her deeper than any business pledge she had ever heard. She felt her throat tighten, her chest warm with something she couldn't name. The night stretched long, but she did not feel the same fear as before. Instead, she felt the strange, steady rhythm of being tethered to another human being, not by contracts or money, but by survival and something that might be slowly becoming trust. Her mind drifted to the irony. She had built her life on controlling others, but here she was learning to follow. And with every instruction Marcus gave, every calm glance that steadied her, she realized she wasn't just following, she was beginning to want to. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered into the darkness, more to herself than to him. "Maybe I've been measuring the wrong things all my life." She thought he had drifted off, but his voice came low, quiet, almost gentle. "It's never too late to change the measure." Her eyes stung as she closed them, the sound of his words weaving into the crash of waves. And for the first time in years, Rose felt the beginning of surrender, not to fear, not to weakness, but to something far stronger than either. The possibility of love growing in the cracks of survival. The third morning came with a softness Rose had never noticed in dawn before. The sky above the island shifted from deep indigo to a watercolor wash of pink and gold, gulls circling lazily overhead. She stretched beneath the lean-to, sand clinging to her skin, her body aching but strangely alive. Marcus was already by the waterline, his figure outlined against the rising sunday. He had fashioned a crude spear from wreckage, moving with patience that seemed carved into his bones. Rose rose slowly, brushing off the sand, and walked to him. "You don't waste a minute, do you?" she said. He glanced back, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Minutes matter. Breakfast matters more." She crossed her arms, smirking. Do I look like someone who knows how to catch breakfast? His eyes twinkled. Not yet, but you will. She waded in, the water cool around her legs, and Marcus guided her stance. Hold steady. Wait until the fish come close. Don't chase them. Patience. Rose huffed. Patience isn't my strength. He met her gaze, steady. Then maybe that's why you're here. She wanted to protest, but the words sank into her. She tightened her grip on the spear, trying again. The first attempt failed, then the second, water splashing up as the fish darted away. She muttered curses under her breath while Marcus chuckled softly. Wall Street doesn't prepare you for this, huh? She shot him a glare but couldn't hide her smile. By the fourth try, she managed to pin one against the shallows. She lifted it triumphantly, laughter spilling out of her chest in a way she hadn't heard in years. Marcus grinned, and for the first time she saw not just calm in his face, but joy. They cooked their catch over the fire, the smell of charred skin and salt filling the air. Rose took a bite, the taste simple yet more satisfying than any chef-crafted meal she'd eaten in Manhattan. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, unbothered by manners. This feels ridiculous, she admitted. I've dined in Paris, Tokyo, and Rome, but this is the best meal I've had in a decade. Marcus chewed quietly, then said, Maybe it's because you worked for it. Food tastes different when it's earned. She considered that, nodding slowly. She thought of the countless meals half-eaten at boardroom tables, her mind always on the next deal. Here, on this nameless strip of sand, she was present in a way she had never been. Later, Marcus showed her how to weave palm fronds into mats, his hands deft, her own clumsy at first. They sat side by side, knees brushing now and then, and each touch sent a quiet pulse through her chest. She studied him as he worked, noticing the scar near his wrist, the roughness of his palms. You've done this before, she said softly. He nodded. Search and rescue training. Spent years helping people who didn't always make it out. Some nights the faces don't leave me. His tone was steady, but Rose caught the shadow in his eyes. She wanted to reach out, to ask more, but she sensed the pain still lived close to the surface. Instead, she pressed her hand lightly against the mat they were weaving. Then maybe saving me isn't just survival, maybe it's something else. He looked at her, something unspoken flickering between them before he returned to the fronds. The afternoon brought heat, and they rested in the shade. Rose lay on her back, staring at the sky through swaying palms. You ever think about what you'd be doing right now if we hadn't crashed? She asked. Marcus tilted his head. Flying another trip, dropping someone off who'd never remember my name. She bit her lip. And I'd be in Miami, telling a room full of investors how unstoppable I am. She paused, then added quietly, But out here I don't feel unstoppable. I feel alive. He regarded her for a long moment. There's a difference. His words struck her with such clarity she almost sat up. For years she had confused being untouchable with being alive, but the two weren't the same. As evening came, they walked the shoreline together, searching for driftwood. Rose carried a bundle awkwardly, and Marcus reached to steady her. Their fingers brushed and lingered, neither pulling away immediately. Her pulse jumped, and she forced herself to look at the horizon instead of him. The sun melted into the sea, painting the sky in deep crimson, and for the first time in her life Rose felt she didn't need to be anywhere else. She belonged to this moment, to the rhythm of waves and the man walking beside her. That night the fire crackled high, their shelter sturdier, their bellies fuller. Rose watched Marcus tend the flames, his face bathed in light. She found herself speaking again without planning. I used to think I had everything, but now, maybe I was starving all along. Marcus looked at her, his gaze steady and unflinching. Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what really matters. She swallowed hard, his words echoing inside her. She wanted to tell him what she was beginning to feel, how every glance and gesture pulled her deeper, but fear held her tongue. For now, she simply sat closer, the warmth of the fire mingling with the warmth of his presence. When sleep finally came, she lay listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, her heart beating to match it. She knew she was crossing a threshold she couldn't undo. Day by day, hour by hour, Marcus was breaking down walls she had spent a lifetime building. And though it terrified her, she realized with startling clarity that she wanted those walls gone. Because inside the cracks, something new had taken root, something fragile and fierce all at once. something that felt like the beginning of love. The heat of the next day pressed heavy on their shoulders, the sun blazing down on the small island with relentless force. Rose wiped sweat from her brow, her blouse already damp and clinging, her body sore from work she had never imagined doing in her old life. Marcus was building a sturdier fire pit using stones from the shoreline, his jaw tight with concentration. She watched him move, steady and deliberate even with his injured shoulder, and a strange swell of admiration stirred in her chest. She had spent years surrounded by men who demanded respect with money or power, but Marcus commanded it with quiet presence. By mid-afternoon the horizon darkened, clouds rolling in thick and low. The air changed heavier, charged, carrying the smell of rain and the promise of something violent. Marcus looked up, his expression sharpening. Storm's coming. Rose turned toward the gathering black clouds, the sight both beautiful and terrifying. She swallowed. How bad? He gathered the fronds they had used for mats, stacking them under the lean-to. Bad enough. We need to brace the shelter, tie it down. His tone left no room for argument. Rose moved quickly, her heart racing as thunder rumbled in the distance. They worked together, securing the panels with twisted bits of wiring Marcus had salvaged, tightening knots with raw fingers. The wind rose fast, whipping her hair into her face. She struggled with a frond until Marcus appeared beside her, his good hand covering hers to guide the knot. His touch sent heat through her even as the air turned cold. By dusk, the storm arrived in full force. Rain hammered the island, sheets of water driving sideways, wind shrieking through the palms. They huddled beneath the shelter, the fire drowned, the world reduced to darkness and fury. Rose trembled, her arms wrapped around her knees, every crash of thunder shaking her core. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Marcus's face calm, focused, though water streamed down his temples. She envied his steadiness, longed for it. When a gust ripped part of the shelter loose, Marcus lunged forward to hold it down, grimacing as his shoulder screamed. Rose scrambled to help, pressing against the panel with him, their bodies braced together against the storm. "Don't let go," she shouted above the roar. "Not planning to," he replied, teeth clenched. Hours passed in a blur of noise and fear. At last the storm eased, the wind dropping, the rain softening to a drizzle. They collapsed together on the sand, soaked and exhausted, the remnants of the shelter still standing. Rose's chest heaved with adrenaline, her body shivering despite the warmth of the tropics. Marcus sat beside her, shoulders bowed, eyes closed. For a long moment neither spoke, the silence filled with the drip of rain from palm leaves. Finally, Rose whispered, "I thought we wouldn't make it." His eyes opened, steady even now. "You made it because you fought. That's what counts." She turned toward him, her throat tight. "I'm not used to fighting for anything real. Deals, contracts, those are games. Tonight felt different. Tonight I realized how fragile I really am." He looked at her then, rain glistening on his skin, and something in his gaze softened. Fragile isn't weakness. Pretending you're unbreakable, that's weakness. Letting someone see the cracks, that's strength. The words pierced her. For years she had hidden every vulnerability, convinced that showing humanity would cost her everything. Yet here, soaked and trembling, she felt seen in a way no boardroom victory had ever given her. She leaned closer without thinking, her voice a whisper. "Do you ever get tired of carrying it all alone?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Every day. I lost someone once during a rescue. A kid. I swore I'd never let anyone close again. Hurts less when you don't care." His voice cracked, almost imperceptible. Rose reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "But you still care. I can see it." The contact lingered, electric, as if the storm outside had shifted inside her chest. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. For a long time they sat like that, the fireless night lit only by fading lightning and the unspoken confessions between them. Rose's heart pounded with a truth she could no longer deny. She had begun to fall not for the illusion of safety, not for the idea of a savior, but for Marcus himself, steady and scarred and achingly real. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, ignoring the pain in his body, and he allowed it, his chin brushing her hair. The world felt impossibly small, the island, the storm, the two of them, and yet inside that smallness was a vastness she had never known. When at last the rain stopped completely, they lay beneath the patched shelter, side by side on the damp sand. Rose listened to the rhythm of the waves, her pulse sinking to it. She whispered into the darkness, unsure if he would hear. "I've spent so long pretending I didn't need anyone. Maybe that was my biggest lie." Marcus's reply came low, almost a murmur. "Maybe the strongest thing you'll ever do is need someone anyway." Her throat tightened. She turned slightly, enough to see his face in the dim light. Their eyes met, and for a moment it felt inevitable. The space between them closed slowly, not rushed but certain, until her lips brushed his in a kiss that was more confession than passion. It was tentative, trembling, yet filled with the promise of something deeper. When they parted, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. The storm had torn down more than palm fronds, it had stripped away the last of the walls between them. Rose lay awake long after Marcus drifted into shallow sleep, her mind alive with questions and fears, but also with a new, undeniable certainty. She no longer felt like a CEO stranded on an island. She felt like a woman who had finally been seen, and in that seeing, something had begun to bloom. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She was afraid of what would happen when tomorrow took this away. The morning after the storm felt almost unreal, as though the island itself had been scrubbed clean by the night's violence. The sky stretched impossibly blue, and the ocean sparkled with deceptive calm. Rose awoke to the sound of Marcus stoking what remained of their fire, his movements careful, his injured shoulder stiff. Her body ached, her clothes still damp, but inside she carried something new, the memory of their shared confession in the storm's heart, the press of his hand against hers, the fragile kiss that had sealed more than survival. She sat up, brushing sand from her skin, and met his eyes. He gave a faint nod, no words, but the look carried more weight than any boardroom vow she had ever sworn. They ate a meager breakfast of roasted shellfish Marcus had gathered, the taste salty and raw but grounding. Afterward he stood, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Clear skies today," he said. "Perfect time to try the signal again." Rose followed his gaze, her heart leaping. The day stretched ahead, ripe with possibility, and she dared to imagine rescue. Together they gathered driftwood and palm fronds, piling them into a high stack. Marcus showed her how to layer the driest pieces at the base, then build upward with heavier logs. "The smoke has to be thick, dark. That's what they'll see from the air," he explained. Rose worked beside him, sweat beading at her temple, determination driving her in a way she hadn't felt since the days she clawed her way up in Manhattan. But this was different. This wasn't about proving herself to investors or rivals. This was about survival, about hope. By midday the pile stood taller than either of them. Marcus struck flint, coaxing sparks into a flame. Soon smoke curled skyward, thin at first, then billowing darker as the green fronds caught. Rose's chest tightened as she watched it spiral into the sky. "Do you think they'll see it?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He simply stood, his gaze fixed on the horizon, jaw set. Then he said softly, "If they're looking, yes." Hours passed with them tending the fire, feeding it carefully, eyes straining against the blinding blue. Rose's heartbeat surged every time a bird passed overhead, every time the wind shifted the smoke. Then, in the late afternoon, a distant hum rose in the air. Rose gasped, clutching Marcus's arm. "Listen!" The sound grew louder until a speck appeared on the horizon, rotors flashing in the sunday. A helicopter. She sprang to her feet, waving wildly, shouting into the sky. Marcus threw green leaves onto the fire, thickening the smoke into a desperate column. They both screamed until their throats ached, arms raised, eyes pleading. The helicopter droned closer, passing over the island. For a moment, Rose was certain they had been spotted. She saw the glint of sunlight off the glass, the blur of figures inside. Her heart pounded with joy, her voice breaking. "They see us. They have to." But the machine kept moving, the sound fading slowly into the distance, the speck shrinking until it vanished altogether. Rose's knees buckled. She fell onto the sand, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "They didn't see us," she whispered, the words cracking. "We were right here, and they didn't see us." Marcus crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something fierce. "Then we make them see us tomorrow, or the day after," We don't quit." She looked at him through blurred vision, her chest heaving. "I can't go back to waiting, Marcus. I can't sit here just hoping someone notices me. I've done that my whole life in a different way. Waiting for approval, waiting for acceptance. I'm done." His grip tightened, anchoring her. "Then don't wait. Live now, with me. Right here, we don't belong to anyone else. Just us." His words struck deeper than the disappointment, igniting something raw inside her. She wiped her tears, nodding slowly. "You're right. If no one comes, we still have each other. That has to be enough." They sat in silence, watching the smoke rise into the fading sky. Rose felt the ache of rejection, the bitterness of being overlooked even in survival, but she also felt the warmth of Marcus's hand, the truth of his presence. She realized then that the helicopter's passing had changed everything. She no longer wanted rescue, only to return to her old life. She wanted a different rescue, one that meant leaving behind the cage she had built. As twilight settled, they rebuilt the fire smaller, letting it burn low for warmth. Rose leaned against Marcus, her head resting on his shoulder. "I used to think silence was weakness," she murmured. "But now, in this silence, I feel stronger than I ever have." Marcus tilted his head, his voice soft. "That's because silence doesn't lie. It tells you exactly who you are." She smiled faintly, her eyes closing. The disappointment of the day still stung, but beneath it lay something steadier. The helicopter had flown away, but she and Marcus had chosen each other. And in that choice, Rose felt the beginnings of freedom. She drifted to sleep with the sound of his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, her dreams filled not with skyscrapers or boardrooms, but with the fire's glow and the man who had shown her that survival could be more than just living, it could be the start of a new life. The night after the failed rescue settled heavy, the air thick with the scent of smoke and salt. Rose lay awake, listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside her, the waves rolling like a heartbeat against the shore. Her body still trembled from the moment the helicopter vanished, but her mind churned with something else: clarity. She realized with startling force that she wasn't afraid of the island itself. She was afraid of going back to the world where she was Rose Whitman, the Iron Queen of Tech, who had built empires from cold calculation and sleepless nights. She was afraid that if she returned, she would slip into the same cage of glass towers and hollow applause. Here, stripped of all that, she had discovered a part of herself she had buried so deep she hardly recognized it, and the man beside her had been the key. By dawn she was already awake, sitting by the fire pit as the embers smoldered. Marcus stirred soon after, his hair damp with dew, his body stiff from the hard sand. He joined her, crouching silently. For a long time neither spoke, their silence filled with unspoken agreement. Today they kept moving forward, no matter the disappointment. Finally Rose broke the quiet. "When that helicopter passed, it felt like my whole life again, fighting to be seen, to be heard, and still invisible." Marcus poked at the embers with a stick, his face unreadable. "The world's good at ignoring people. Doesn't mean you let it define you." She studied him, sensing weight behind his words. "You're not just talking about now, are you?" He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw not just calm but something raw. "I grew up in places where being invisible was safer. South side of Atlanta. You kept your head down or you didn't last long. Even when I started flying, even when I wore the uniform, people saw a black man before they saw a pilot. Sometimes they didn't see me at all." His voice was steady, but she felt the ache underneath. Rose swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "So you stopped trying to be seen?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I just stopped needing their eyes to prove I existed." The words cut through her like glass. She thought of the years she had spent clawing her way up, desperate for every headline, every scrap of validation. And here was Marcus, teaching her that visibility wasn't survival, it was noise. She reached for his hand, tentative, her fingers brushing his rough skin. "I've been chasing the wrong things," she whispered. He didn't pull away. Instead, he clasped her hand gently, grounding her. "Then stop chasing. Start living." They spent the morning repairing the shelter, replacing fronds torn by the storm. Rose surprised herself by working with focus, her hands blistered but steady. Marcus guided her, offering small corrections, but he no longer treated her like someone fragile. She had proven herself, and his trust gave her strength. By midday they ventured farther inland, seeking fruit. The palms yielded coconuts, tough to crack. Rose struggled, cursing under her breath, until Marcus laughed softly and showed her how to strike them against a stone. She drank the sweet water with delight, juice running down her chin. "I've never tasted anything so real," she said, wiping her face. He chuckled. "That's because it is real. No filters, no packaging, just the world giving what it has." The afternoon heat drove them back to the shore. They sat together beneath the shade, sharing the coconuts, their bodies tired but content. Rose leaned back, closing her eyes, listening to the sea. "You know," she said, "before the crash I thought my life was complete. I had money, power, everything people said mattered, but I was lonely every night, and I convinced myself it was the price of success." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "Now I look at you, at this island, and I wonder if maybe the success was the cage, and I've only just stepped out." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, thoughtful. "Cages come in all shapes. Some are streets you can't walk down. Some are offices at the top of a tower. But they all do the same thing. They make you forget you were born free." The words left her breathless. She opened her eyes, staring at him, and for the first time, she saw not just the man who had saved her life, but the man who was showing her how to live it. She felt her throat tighten. "Marcus, I don't know how this ends. If we're found, if we go back, I don't know what will happen to us." His gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. "Then stop thinking about the end. Think about now. Right now, you're here. Right now, you're not alone." His hand reached out, brushing hers again, and she let her fingers entwine with his. As evening came, they built another fire, letting the flames rise high against the dark. Rose watched him in the glow, her heart thudding with a rhythm she no longer tried to deny. She leaned closer, her voice soft but certain. "When I said last night that I was afraid of being invisible again, I think what I really meant was I'm afraid of going back to who I was before I knew you." Marcus studied her, his expression tender but guarded. "And who are you now?" She drew in a shaky breath. "Someone who doesn't just survive. Someone who finally feels alive. Because of you." The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. Marcus's eyes softened, the firelight reflecting in their depths. He cupped her face gently with his good hand, and for the second time their lips met, this time slower, deeper, emerging not of desperation but of choice. It was a kiss that told the truth. Neither had dared speak aloud that love had taken root in the harshest of places, blooming in salt and smoke and survival. When they finally pulled apart, Rose's heart raced, but her voice was steady. "No matter what happens, no matter if we're rescued tomorrow or never, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose us." Marcus rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm. "Then don't. We'll fight for it. Same way we fought for every breath here." The fire crackled, waves crashed, and above them the stars returned in their endless silence. Rose felt the weight of her old life slipping further away, replaced by the fierce clarity of this moment. She no longer belonged to the boardrooms or the headlines. She belonged to the man beside her, to the island that had stripped her bare, to the love that had risen from ruin. And as she closed her eyes, leaning into Marcus's steady presence, she realized that for the first time in decades, she wasn't running toward power or away from fear. She was simply standing still, alive, and in love. The days after their second kiss passed in a rhythm that felt almost like life rather than survival. Each morning Rose woke to the sound of Marcus by the shoreline, his figure outlined by dawn, his patience shaping her sense of safety. They fished, gathered coconuts, mended the shelter, and rebuilt the signal fire. At night, they sat close by the flames, speaking less, needing fewer words as silence became its own kind of intimacy. Yet beneath the calm, Rose felt the quiet hum of uncertainty. Every glance, every brush of Marcus's hand, every stolen smile tightened the bond between them. But with it came the shadow of the question neither dared to ask. What would happen if rescue truly came? Would the fragile world they had built shatter against the weight of the old one? That question came into sharper focus on the fifth morning, when Marcus spotted a faint silhouette on the horizon, a fishing boat cutting slowly across the distant waters. Rose's heart leapt, her pulse hammering. "They'll see us," she cried, rushing toward the fire. Marcus was already feeding it green leaves, smoke curling skyward in thick black plumes. Together they shouted, waved, jumped until their throats were raw and their arms ached. The boat seemed to pause, the silhouette shifting as though someone had looked their way. Rose clutched Marcus's arm, her eyes brimming with desperate hope. "This is it, Marcus. They see us." But then the boat turned, its bow angling away, moving slowly until the shape shrank, then vanished altogether into the haze of sea and sky. The silence afterward was deafening. Rose dropped to the sand, her chest heaving. "Why? Why didn't they come?" Her voice broke, a sob tearing loose. "We were right here." Marcus crouched beside her, his expression firm but his touch gentle. "It could have been anything. Maybe they didn't see. Maybe they were afraid to approach. Doesn't matter. We keep going." She looked at him, anger sparking through her grief. "How can you just accept it? Doesn't it crush you, Marcus? Doesn't it make you want to scream?" His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "It makes me want to fight harder. Screaming wastes breath. Breath keeps you alive." Her anger deflated under the weight of his calm. She pressed her face into her hands, tears mixing with grit. "I don't know how you do it. I've built everything on control, on bending the world to my will, and here I can't control anything." He placed a hand lightly on her back. "Maybe that's the lesson. You can't always control the storm, but you can control who you are in it." She lifted her head, eyes red, and whispered, "And who am I now?" His lips pressed into a faint smile. "Someone stronger than you've ever been. Someone I trust with my life." The words steadied her in a way no investor's approval ever had. She drew a shaky breath, letting the truth of his trust seep into her. It felt heavier than any contract, and infinitely more precious. She realized that trust, not money, not power, was what she had been starving for all along. That afternoon they walked the perimeter of the island together, searching for driftwood. Rose found herself watching Marcus more than the horizon, the way his body moved despite pain, the quiet resilience in every gesture. When they paused to rest beneath a palm, she turned to him suddenly. "Marcus, if we're rescued tomorrow, what happens to us?" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. His face tightened, his silence stretching long. Finally, he said, "We go back. You to your world, me to mine. That's the truth." Her heart clenched. "And us?" He looked at her, his voice low. "That depends on whether what we have here can survive out there." The honesty stung, but she respected it. She swallowed, meeting his gaze. "Then I want to make it survive. I don't care what it costs me." He searched her face, as if weighing the depth of her conviction. At last he nodded, slow and solemn. "Then we'll fight for it." That night the fire burned bright, the flames tall against the dark. Rose leaned against Marcus, her head on his shoulder, their hands intertwined. The disappointment of the boat still weighed heavy, but beneath it a new strength pulsed. She whispered, "I never thought I'd say this, but maybe this island gave me more than it took away." He turned slightly, his breath warm against her hair. "Maybe it stripped away what you didn't need, so you could see what you did." She closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it sink into her bones. Later, as the stars wheeled overhead, Rose drifted to sleep with her fingers still locked with his. She dreamed not of skyscrapers or boardrooms, but of fires and waves, of Marcus's steady voice calling her back when she faltered. And when she woke in the gray hush of dawn, she realized the test of trust had already begun. Rescue would come, or it wouldn't. But what they had built here, this fragile, stubborn love, would live only if they chose to keep it alive, the way they fed the fire, breath by breath, hand by hand, together. The 10th dawn came quietly. The sky brushed with faint pink as gulls circled above the wreckage half buried in sand. Rose woke with the heaviness of a restless night clinging to her. She had dreamed of the city glittering towers, voices calling her name, headlines flashing across screens, and when she opened her eyes to the small fire pit and the salt-stained lean-to, she felt both relief and fear. Relief that she was still here beside Marcus, fear that one day she wouldn't be. Marcus was already awake, crouched by the shoreline with the spear he had fashioned. He stood ankle-deep in the surf, still as a statue, waiting for movement in the water. Rose watched him, struck again by the patience etched into his very being. In her world, patience was weakness. Deals were struck in seconds, fortunes turned in minutes. Here, patience was survival. When he returned with 2 fish skewered on the tip, she smiled despite the tightness in her chest. "You make it look easy," she said. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It's never easy. You just stop showing the struggle. Aye. They cooked the fish over the flames, sharing the small meal in silence. Rose picked at the charred skin, her appetite dulled by the storm brewing inside her. Finally, she set the fish aside and spoke. Marcus, I keep thinking about what you said yesterday. About us, about whether we could survive out there. He looked at her steadily, waiting. She pressed on. I need to know if you believe in us. Not just here, not just in this moment, but beyond. His brow furrowed, his silence stretching too long. Rose's stomach twisted. You don't, do you? She whispered. He exhaled slowly, his voice quiet but firm. I believe in what we have, but I know the world you come from. It doesn't make space for men like me. The words hit her harder than she expected. She sat back, her heart pounding. Men like you, Marcus, you saved me. You've shown me more strength, more integrity than anyone I've ever known. His eyes darkened. And yet when you step off this island, you go back to a life where people judge by bank accounts, by skin, by headlines. You think they'll let me stand beside you? She opened her mouth, but no words came. The truth of his fear cut too close. She wanted to tell him she didn't care, that she would walk away from all of it, but doubt crept in like a shadow. Would she really? Could she? The silence between them grew sharp, heavier than the storm that had battered their shelter days before. Rose turned away, blinking hard. So what, we just give up before we even try? Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm saying we face reality. Hope doesn't build bridges where people tear them down. His words echoed, filling her with both fury and sorrow. She stood abruptly, pacing the sand. All my life I fought to prove people wrong, to prove I was more than what they thought, and now you're telling me not to fight for this? Her voice cracked, tears stinging her eyes. I can't accept that. Oi. Marcus rose, wincing as his shoulder protested. He faced her, his gaze steady but pained. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm asking you to be ready, because the world out there doesn't change just because we changed in here. The words landed like a stone. Rose pressed her fists against her chest, trembling. Then let me be the one to change it. Let me fight. For us. He studied her, something shifting in his expression. But before either could speak further, the wind carried a sound that froze them both, a distant drone, faint but distinct. Rose spun toward the horizon, her heart racing. Marcus, do you hear that? He nodded, already moving toward the fire pit. Together they piled driftwood, feeding the flames until smoke billowed skyward. The sound grew louder, a plane this time, cutting across the distance. Rose's chest pounded with wild hope. She waved her arms, shouting, her voice raw. Here, we're here. The plane passed, its shadow gliding briefly over the water. For a moment Rose swore it dipped, circling as if it had seen them. Her breath caught. They saw us, she whispered, clutching Marcus's arm. But the plane straightened and kept going, shrinking into the vast sky until it was gone. Rose collapsed to her knees, the sand hot against her skin. Her sobs tore free, each one heavier than the last. Twice, Marcus. Twice they left us. What if no one ever comes? Marcus knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His voice was low, resolute. Then we build a life here. We stop waiting. We start living. She lifted her face, streaked with tears, and searched his eyes. In them she saw no fear, only determination, and in that moment she understood. Rescue might never come. But she had already been rescued from herself, from the cage of ambition, from the loneliness she had mistaken for strength. That night, as the fire cracked against the dark, Rose and Marcus sat shoulder to shoulder, the silence between them no longer sharp but tender. She whispered, If we never leave, promise me one thing. Promise me we won't waste this. He turned, his gaze steady. I promise, whatever happens, we'll make it matter. Her chest eased, the knot of fear loosening. She leaned against him, letting the sound of the waves lull her. For the first time, she realized that rescue wasn't the only ending. There was another ending, one they could write together, on their own terms. And whether the world ever came for them or not, they had already found what they needed most, each other. The night after the second plane passed without stopping was colder than the rest, though the air was still heavy with salt and humidity. Rose lay awake, staring at the fire Marcus had rebuilt, her thoughts spinning like the tide. Twice they had been within reach of rescue. twice ignored, and something inside her had shifted. The panic was still there, but it had dulled into a deeper resolve. She turned her head to look at Marcus, who sat a few feet away with his injured shoulder bound tightly, his face half in shadow, half in firelight. He hadn't said much since the plane disappeared, but she could see the weight pressing on him. The silence stretched until she broke it. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "if the universe brought us here on purpose?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stirred the fire with a stick, sparks spiraling into the night, before saying, "I don't believe in accidents, but I don't believe in fairy tales either. We're here because things went wrong. What matters is what we do with it." Rose sat up, her chest tightening. "Then what do we do with it, Marcus? Because I can't keep waiting for someone else to save me. I don't want to live like that anymore." He looked at her, his dark eyes steady, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability behind them. "We survive, day by day. That's all I know how to do." She moved closer, her hand brushing his. "But it's more than that now, at least for me." Her voice faltered, but she forced the words out. "It's you. You're what matters." Marcus drew in a slow breath, his jaw tightening as though holding back a flood. "Rose, you don't know what you're saying. Out there, in your world, I'm just a pilot. I'm the man who fades into the background." She shook her head fiercely. "No, you're the man who saved me. You're the man who's taught me more about strength in 2 weeks than I learned in 20 years of boardrooms." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "And I'm done letting other people tell me what I should want. I want you." "Oh." For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze locked on hers, the crackle of fire filling the silence. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Then you have me." The words hit her harder than any declaration of love she had ever heard. She leaned forward, her lips finding his, not with the hesitation of before, but with certainty. The kiss deepened, the fire casting shifting shadows around them, sealing promises neither needed to speak. Later, as they lay side by side under the makeshift shelter, Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the waves. She whispered into the dark, "I used to think love was weakness, something that distracted you from winning. But now it feels like the only thing worth winning." Marcus's hand traced lightly across her arm, his voice a murmur. "Love's not weakness, it's risk. The hardest kind of risk. Because it means giving someone the power to break you." She tilted her head to look at him. "And you've given me that power?" His lips curved faintly. "I have, and I trust you with it." The admission pierced her chest with both joy and fear. She tightened her hold on him, whispering, "Then I'll never break it. Not for anything." They drifted into sleep wrapped in each other's warmth, the fire burning low. The next day dawned clear, the sea calm, but their bond had shifted. They worked together with an ease that surprised even Rose, gathering wood, fishing, repairing the shelter, every action carrying the undercurrent of a new intimacy. They spoke less, yet every glance, every smile carried meaning. As they shared a coconut by the shore, Rose found herself laughing, unguarded, as Marcus teased her about her clumsy strikes with the spear. "For someone who once commanded empires, you're terrible with sharp sticks," he said, eyes gleaming. She tossed a piece of husk at him, laughing harder than she had in years. The sound felt foreign on her tongue, but also healing. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they sat by the fire again. The sky was painted in shades of orange and violet, the sea a mirror. Rose turned to Marcus, her expression serious. "Promise me something." He looked at her, brows raised. "What?" She swallowed, her throat tight. "Promise me that no matter what happens, whether we're rescued tomorrow or never, you won't let this fade. Us." His gaze held hers, steady and solemn. "I promise. But you promise me too. Don't let the world change this when we step off this island." She nodded, her eyes stinging. "I swear it." They sealed the vow with another kiss, the fire warm against their skin, the stars kindling overhead. Rose felt the moment etch itself into her bones, deeper than any contract or headline. For the first time in her life, she believed in forever. When they finally lay down, Marcus pulled her close, his arms strong and protective. Rose closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The storm of doubt and fear that had haunted her since the crash was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. No matter what tomorrow brought, she had chosen him, and he had chosen her. And in that choice, she felt freer than she had ever been in the world she left behind. The 12th morning broke with the kind of light that felt like a promise. The air was crisp after a night of soft rain, the sea calm, glittering beneath the early Sunday. Rose stirred beneath the lean-to, Marcus's arm heavy across her waist, his warmth steady against her back. For a fleeting moment, she let herself imagine this was their life forever. No boardrooms, no shareholders, no helicopters passing without notice. Just the two of them, the sea, the fire, and the rhythm they had built from nothing. She turned slightly, studying his face as he slept, the lines of strength softened in rest. A tenderness swelled in her chest so powerful it almost frightened her. She whispered without meaning to, "I love you." The words slipped free like a secret, and though Marcus did not stir, saying them aloud settled something inside her. Later that morning, Marcus rose to check the traps they had set along the rocks. Rose followed, barefoot in the damp sand, her blouse torn and stained, hair wild but her spirit stronger than it had ever been. They worked in silence until Marcus suddenly stilled, his gaze locked on the horizon. Rose followed his eyes and froze. A large vessel, unmistakable this time, cut through the waters toward them. Not a fishing boat, not a fleeting speck of a plane, but a Coast Guard ship, solid and real. Rose's breath caught. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're coming." He didn't move, didn't cheer. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Looks like it." And they raced to the fire pit, piling green fronds onto the flames until thick black smoke rose in a column. Rose waved both arms, shouting, though she knew the ship had already seen them. The vessel slowed, its bow angling toward the island. Relief flooded her, so sharp it almost hurt. Tears blurred her vision as she turned to Marcus. "We're going home." But Marcus's face remained grave. He watched the ship approach, his jaw tight. "Are you sure that's what you want?" The question cut through her joy like a knife. She faltered, her arms falling to her sides. "What do you mean? Of course But the truth caught in her throat. Did she really want to go back? To skyscrapers, endless meetings, a life of power built on loneliness? She stared at him, her heart pounding. "Marcus, I don't know anymore." The ship anchored offshore, a small boat lowering into the water, men in uniforms rowing toward them. Rose's pulse raced. The sound of voices carried across the waves, foreign and startling after so many days of only Marcus's calm tone. She turned back to him, panic rising. "What if they take me back and I lose this? Lose us?" He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek, his eyes steady. "Then don't lose it. What we have isn't tied to this island. It's tied to us. If you want it, we fight for it. Together." Her breath shook. "Do you want it too?" His lips curved faintly, his voice low. "I already told you you have me. That hasn't changed." The men reached shore, splashing through the shallows. One called out, "Are you the survivors from the downed jet?" Rose's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the men. Her voice wavered but held. "Yes, we are." The officers guided them toward the small boat. Rose hesitated at the water's edge, her bare feet sinking into the wet sand. She turned to look at the island one last time, the wreckage half buried, the shelter they had built together, the fire still smoking. It wasn't just debris. It was the place where she had shed her armor, where she had found Marcus, where she had found herself. A piece of her wanted to run back, to stay, but Marcus's hand found hers, grounding her. Together they stepped into the boat. The ride to the ship was surreal, the sound of the motor loud in her ears, the sight of civilization drawing closer with every wave. Rose clutched Marcus's hand, her knuckles white. She whispered fiercely, "Promise me, Marcus. Promise me that when we get back, you won't disappear into the background. Promise me you'll let me fight for us." He turned his head, meeting her eyes with quiet fire. "I promise. But don't just fight for me, Rose. Fight for yourself, too. For the life you really want." When they climbed aboard the ship, Rose blinked at the rush of uniforms, the sudden return of structure and order. Medical staff surrounded them, checking vitals, offering blankets. Rose let them work, but her eyes never left Marcus. In the chaos, he was her constant. When one of the officers asked her name, she answered clearly, "Rose Whitman." The man nodded, scribbling notes. "People have been looking for you. You're going to be headline news." Rose stiffened, the old weight of expectation pressing back too soon. She looked at Marcus, and in his steady gaze she found the courage to speak the truth she had been building towards since the crash. "Then let them write what they want. For once, I don't care about headlines." That night, safe on the ship with the coastline still hours away, Rose and Marcus sat together beneath the open sky. The stars shone the same as they had on the island, eternal and indifferent. Rose leaned against him, whispering, "We've been rescued, but I feel like the real rescue happened before today." He rested his arm around her, his voice soft. "It did. You rescued yourself." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words settle deep. "No," she murmured, "we rescued each other." As the ship cut steadily toward the world that had once defined her, Rose felt no fear. The island had changed her. Marcus had changed her. And whatever battles awaited disbelieving investors, critical headlines, the silent walls of prejudice, they would face them together. Because in the firelight and storms, in hunger and heartbreak, they had already proven the truth. Survival had been only the beginning. Love was the real victory. The lesson from Rose and Marcus's story is that true strength is not found in power, wealth, or titles, but in vulnerability, trust, and love. Stranded on an island stripped of everything familiar, Rose discovered that survival was not only about enduring storms and hunger, but about facing herself honestly. Marcus showed her that dignity and courage come from quiet persistence, not recognition. Together they proved that love can grow even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes being broken down to nothing is the only way to uncover what truly matters: connection, compassion, and the courage to fight for a life that is real.